Conversations across time. 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 Conversations across time.
Good evening and welcome to Conversations Across Time. My name is Vivian Crawford. Seated next to me is my co-host, former Pennsylvania State Representative Babette Josephs. Conversations Across Time is the television show that invites you, the viewers, to suppose what possible conversations could happen between important historical figures from differing time periods. The goal of Conversations Across Time is to introduce you, our audience, to the thought processes and strategic applications of immortals who are here this evening to discuss policies and issues which are relevant to today. Now, tonight's panel is a continuation of last week's discussion involving our invited guest, Congressman Adam Clayton Powell, Jr., and the second president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Mr. Brigham Young. Welcome both of you.
Thank you for having us back.
Great to be back.
And when we were here last week, we had an intense discussion about the Church of Latter-day Saints. And we sort of gave some explanation to our audience and were educated ourselves into the beliefs of that church. But there is so much more that we need to touch upon tonight. So I'm going to, when we talk about power, for instance, I think the church is really indicia of religion and politics and how they are juxtapositioned, how they intersect, really. And so Congressman Powell, as a congressman and a minister, and the son of a minister, you certainly had a long history of the intersection of church and politics. But moving along to get into a further discussion of power, you were a very powerful congressman. You were the chair of a powerful committee in Congress. And you ended up actually being railroaded by your peers. I've always felt it had to do with the fact that you were so powerful. And I'd like us to get into that a little bit if we may, because what ended up happening to you is you were accused of having someone on your payroll, actually was your third wife. And the fact is that she didn't perform any duties, and that was the impetus that was used by your peers to unseat you. I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, if you would.
It's an interesting thing. There is much made about what many refer to as shenanigans on my part, and it's misunderstood. I was doing nothing different than any of my other colleagues. The fact that I was doing it simply made it more noteworthy. Most certainly there was a racial issue there, but I felt entitled to the same benefits as my compatriots. So those benefits may well have been corruptions, but in fact they were commonplace, and if they were available, it would seem to me that I could avail myself of that as well. It is unfortunate the way things happened.
But the Supreme Court finally said you can't take this man's seat away. Well, you won your case.
I did win my case, and my case was representative of the Congress had, in effect, made the decision for my community of who would represent it, and I believe that the fact that I was reelected to the seat that was vacated by my dismissal speaks for itself.
But they were allowed to strip you of your seniority and your committee chair.
It is unfortunate that a man of black heritage cannot rise but so high before others want to chop him down. These were the things that I became subject to, and again, it was unfortunate.
Doesn't sound so much different from what the church did when they decided that
Yes.
their rival, when Brigham Young decided that his rival was marked by Cain and managed to dispose of him that way. Doesn't sound really very different.
Those with access to influence the perception of others generally do so for their own benefit.
Well, it's very convenient what God says to them.
Well, you're
Mark
not-
of Cain,
you're-
very convenient.
You're not implying that religion and power structures use the same procedures and mechanisms to gain supremacy over other.
I was not implying it. I was saying it
Oh,
pretty
okay. I just wanted to
explicitly.
clarify that. Make sure.
No, absolutely. I agree. I believe that.
Now, do you disagree?
I see that. I have observed that. I have read about that. During history, when you look at the way churches of any denomination, even denominations that don't have churches, use their power the way secular organizations use their power,
Well-
nakedly and ruthlessly.
And sometimes constructively.
Very
But
rarely.
how's that different from when my church advocates certain procedures and certain things that the government should do, and we vote through a democratic process, and we exert all the influence we can through the church, through the ministry? How does that differ from any other pressure group in society? Why should churches not have the same right to pressure the elected representatives as a business group or a labor group?
Churches do. They have a right to raise their voices. But in my opinion, that in this country, they don't have a right to force me to follow their dictates.
I think what last week when we were talking, I mean, just to remind the audience in case they forgot, last week we were talking about the fact that the church, your church, the Church of Latter-day Saints, early on used political power to exclude anyone who was non-Mormon from actually being able to live in Utah.
When we were a territory, and we had the autonomy of a territory, so we chose not to admit people who were not of our belief, who would dilute the church in the state or in the territory. It was a territory at the time. But that's no different than the same immigration policy many countries, including the United States, today follow. If the the last time you accused me of being involved in the massacre, which I wasn't. However, in your own way, the United States today massacres people from south of the border, Mexican young children who try to get into the country. So that's no different than the policy we practice as Mormons in the Utah territory.
I'm not justifying what the United States
Exactly.
is doing now, and I'm not justifying what the Church of Latter-day Saints did previously.
But
I
we
think
are-
they're both wrong.
And I think so that's
But sovereign territories and sovereign states have practiced discrimination against people coming into the country for centuries. It's nothing new, and I did nothing different than many other people.
No,
to
you were no
present-
better than everybody else. I
Sovereign
agree.
states have also discriminated
or no
against
worse,
people.
right? Okay.
Discriminated against people who are already here. And some of that experience is where we used the church to gather a voice and make a statement. The difference is that we were not looking to exclude anyone, we were looking to be included, and this is the function of our movement.
Mr. Young, I want to make it clear, we are in no way saying that what the United States does and what the policy towards immigration is of the United States currently is something that we approve of. I mean, I just want to make sure you understand that. We disapprove of what was done under your authority, but we also have a disapproval about what's going on today. I mean, that's I don't want you to think that that's where
Including
we're.
all of these deportations
we-
Yeah.
by
we-
a president that I like, generally. That is wrong. He should not be doing that.
We as members of the Church of the Latter-day Saints, we believe that in elected government, in a representative government as it is today, and in fact, some of our religious practices have been outlawed by the government of the United States, and we abide by the decision of the government of the United States. Like our religious tenet, we believe in polygamy. We believe a man should have many wives. I myself had over 20 wives. And
3 was quite enough for me.
But
yeah, but you had them at different times, Mr. Powell.
Exactly.
I had the 20 all at the
At the
same
same
time.
time.
And I can't imagine.
And they didn't wear me out either. But anyway.
well, wait a minute. They didn't wear you out?
No, they didn't. But
Did they twist your tie?
But the point I'm trying to make is we abided by the Supreme Court decision against polygamy, and we no longer, in the mainstream of the Latter-day Saints, we no longer practice polygamy. Now, if we had enough political power to influence the Congress and the Supreme Court to make polygamy a legitimate way of behavior for men and women in the United States, we would certainly favor passing that legislation. But we abided by the decision of the court, so we didn't let our religious belief. Now, there's some people in our religion who are more fundamentalists that have gone from my particular church, and they still practice polygamy. But in the main, the Latter-day Saints do not go against the laws of the United States, even though it might go against our religious doctrine.
Which your religious doctrine does seem to be
Convenient.
rather malleable.
Yes.
Yeah, but
Sometimes it's
does
one-
a church have the right in a democracy to advocate its religious beliefs if it gets enough support for it? So, for example, for centuries in the United States, abortion was illegal because that's a doctrine of the Catholic and some fundamentalist churches.
There's questions about that. In colonial times, apparently not, but things changed when males became doctors. When females were midwives, things were a little different.
Yeah, maybe so, but what I'm saying is, can the church advocate if the Catholic Church can get enough political support, and can it pass laws or change the Constitution to make abortion illegal, as the former senator from this state would have them do?
Santorum.
Mr. Santorum, right?
Oh,
Well, I don't. I want to make it clear because I had some misgivings after we spoke last, because it's our position, my position, and I think Babette probably agrees, that we're not saying that there should never be a Mormon president of the United States. We just didn't want that Mormon. We didn't want Mitt Romney.
we didn't want a Republican. We're Democrats.
We're Democrats. We didn't want so. I mean, I think that was our issue. Plus, he rubs me the wrong way because he seems to be very much an elitist, and that's just not what's needed for him.
And that is not because of his religion. That's because of his
That's because of who he
personality
is.
and his character.
That's because of who he is.
A terrible personality and no character.
I agree. But Representative Powell, what was very striking to me in your circumstance is that to view that the Miss Diego's salary was about $20,000. And the fact that that was something that could be used to route you from your position of power within Congress, especially when we all know that it's so common, even today, it was certainly very common during your time, that elected officials have ghost employees. It's just always been that way. And so for that to be the catalyst for you to be stripped of your committee chairmanship was an affront. It is something that still rankles me when I consider it, because you were doing things we mentioned last week. You were Pan-Africanist before there was such a term as Pan-Africanism. You were interested in the colonial powers being thrown out of Africa, and that Africans being able to self-govern. Now, today,
and the civil rights in this country, he was practically the only person in government who spoke up. He was practically the only person, even in the North, who insisted that skin color, race had nothing to do with what the Constitution said about our relative rights and responsibilities towards each other. And it's for that reason that he got beat out of Congress, I believe.
The principles of colonialism continue to infect the common sense of many. The issues that were in Africa are the same issues that are here, and it has to do with the value of human life. I believe even in our contemporary news we have...
And it has to do with white privilege.
In our contemporary news we have many examples of how the value or the devaluing of life that is not white is a commonplace. So this is not a new phenomenon, and when you poke the bear apparently pokes back. What is true is that we were able to retain our right to represent our community. The stripping of the chairmanship was simply a commandeering of something that they could do. I understand that, and this is what colonialism, this is what imperialism, this is what racism is all about.
Exactly. And when you say that colonialism, imperialism, and racism, those are the triplets. I mean, that's...
And in the case of Mr. Young, one could add sexism, I think, as well, because of the rigid sex roles in your church, that only young men do a certain type of missionary work, only young women do home work in the home,
But
only women's only goal in life is to be mothers,
but
and so on. And
if you speak of feminism, we were one of the first to give the women suffrage in Utah.
Yes.
When the rest of the United States denied women, didn't think they were capable of exercising their right to vote,
because you would have rather had women Mormons voting than
non-Mormons.
non-Mormon men.
I mean,
So Ms. Joseph, would you have preferred we didn't give them the right to vote? Or, I mean,
I don't think
That's not a matter of preference. It's that your motives were political and not altruistic.
but the
So
result
don't
was
pretend
women
they're
got the right to
altruistic.
vote in Utah.
There's nothing wrong with political motives.
no,
Okay.
and that's what I was getting ready to say. There
But
is
let's be clear what they are.
I commend you for doing what was revolutionary at the time, because the reason that you did it was obviously to protect the theocracy of Utah, to have Mormonism control what happened in government in Utah. And by that time, you were unable to preclude non-Mormons from moving to Utah. So by giving women the right to vote, that diluted the non-Mormon population, the amount of power that they had. So no, I commend you for that. I'm one of those that it doesn't really matter to me what the reasoning is for doing something. The fact is that you did it. And
But let's not
we
hide
don't let
the
our
reasoning.
religion stop us from granting women suffrage.
Right. When religion never got in the way of politics in the case of Utah, or so far as I can tell, in the case of the Church of Latter-day Saints. Religion fell to politics immediately, that politics reared its ugly head. That might not
Well,
be
I'm sure
so
you're
bad.
aware that our founder and our leader, Joseph Smith, ran for president of the United States.
And he was in the process of doing that
Yeah,
when the lynch mob got him
exactly.
and murdered him.
Exactly.
And I, anytime you talk about lynching, I'm genetically predisposed to have a problem with that. So I don't think that the way that the Church of Latter-day Saints was treated by the majority population was something I find abhorrent.
Thank you.
Terrible.
It's terrible.
Thank you.
It's an interesting thing to me as I listen to Mr. Young that the concept of having the church affect the psyche and the morals of the political sphere, that's something that we had in common with somewhat of a different set of ends in mind. Mm-hmm. But it is clear that the church must be a voice in the political space. Again, the sacred and the secular are mythically divided. They are actually the same. We move in continuum between the two. And the church then must influence with a righteous voice these things that must happen in our society.
Right, but the church must not, I believe, put itself in a position where people are compelled to follow its precepts.
I would not disagree.
But that's not how Mr. Brigham Young ran his church, nor
Again,
was that his goal.
We don't throw people out of Latter-day Saints because of their political beliefs. We have Republicans, we have Democrats, we have conservatives, we have liberals. So you can have any political. We're not monolithic in our political belief.
But you can't question the president of the church.
Well, that's just like Catholics are not supposed to question the authority of the Pope. It's the same principle.
Right, it's all politics.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, and
But
that.
let's not pretend it's not politics.
And that is indeed what we were aiming to have this conversation about. The fact that politics and religion are so intertwined, and even the movements. I mean, there have been for our regular watchers of this show, you know that we have danced around this subject very often. I mean, we had Joan of Arc on. She was a pawn of politics. We've delved into the kings of England and exactly how they used political power and how they used religion. I mean, the whole thing with Becket and Henry. I mean, all of these things are something that we aspire to educate not only ourselves but the audience. I mean, we spend time on this show looking at just how power works.
The concept of gathering humans around a cause is universal within our planet. What you call it oftentimes depends on what the cause is.
Okay.
But the science of being able to gather people around a concept and mobilize them, this is the essence both of religion and of politics.
But then you get to, for instance, the recent Supreme Court decision having to do with birth control and a corporation where apparently now corporations participate in religion and have souls, I guess.
Well,
and
corporations
go to
are
heaven.
neither persons nor do they have souls. That is both a
Good.
political
You talked to Chief
and a
Justice
religious
Roberts about that.
opinion. Well, I would like to, but access continues to be an issue.
Right, especially since you're no longer living.
But the point is that separation of church and state doesn't mean the church can't participate in the democratic process.
But does it mean that that people's religion is being violated if they are
that's
told to a third party is going to offer birth control to their employees?
Well, that's a slippery slope legal question. But what I'm contending is, as long as the laws do not infringe upon the rights of people to worship or to practice their religion,
Which might have to do with using birth control.
it might. I'm saying that's a slippery legal slope. Then religion can do anything it wants in terms of the political arena. As long as if I decide that we can get a law passed to legalize polygamy for those who want it, as long as I don't say to you, whatever that you must practice polygamy, then why not have it if I can influence the government to have it?
Assuming that the women who are involved in polygamy also want it, which is a big assumption, I agree with you.
All my wives were happy.
I find polygamy complicated.
The thought of it makes me exhausted, and look at this.
Well, how would it
broken
make you
down
exhausted? The man should be the one that's exhausted, Miss Babette,
Yes,
not the
yes.
wife. She gets one day off every 20.
Yes, I was putting myself in your place.
Okay, thank you.
And I was thinking, boy, you must be tired.
Well, and I must say that, of course, marriage has other facets, but it's particularly interesting for me to meander to the thought of what your life would be like today in this day of Viagra and Cialis. I'm just saying.
I'd have 120 wives.
You'd have 120.
You would have been dead at 27.
I mean, that's food for thought.
And indigestion also.
Yes, absolutely. Good.
Now we have that same number of wives, but we do it serially, or husbands as well, instead of polygamously. But it's the same thing in some ways.
I would say many of your presidents had not formal 20 wives, but 20.
So we have heard.
Okay.
So we have heard. That's why we need a woman president, don't you think?
Simply shift the sex of the concubine, it would seem.
Maybe.
Well, I do think that when we look at the way science has progressed, and then look at it through a lens of what was going on in the 19th century in the Church of Latter-day Saints, it would be interesting to see how that impacts the whole notion of polygamy. And you notice whenever
there's many blocks in our religion that still practice polygamy, even though it's against the law. So they do it informally.
Informally.
We marry. They marry, not my group, but they marry inside the church, but not civilly.
Well, listen, I do like the discussion that we've been able to have tonight. It's been particularly enlightening because, as I said last week, I think that this study and preparation for this show has given, hopefully it's given our audience also an insight into just how politics and religion are so interconnected. There is no separation despite what it is that we say. And so I appreciate you gentlemen agreeing to come back this week so that we could tie up this discussion. And I must say that Congressman Powell, you just have an open invitation anytime you want to condescend to show up here.
So wonderful to be with you.
I'm not sure if I'm so excited or was so excited about you being here because of your political stance, or it's just that you are such someone that's so revered within our community that it was just my honor. And Mr. Young, I thank you so much for giving us some explanation in terms of why we are laboring under false assumptions about the foundations of your church. So I appreciate that, and on behalf of Babette and myself and the entire Conversations Across Time crew, we want to thank our guests for being with us tonight and express our gratitude for their insights concerning the issues we discussed. Particularly, we just are very pleased that we were able to impart some information and learn something in this interesting and controversial conversation across time. And we ask our audience to join us next week for another Conversation across time. Thank you. Good night.
Conversations across time. 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 Conversations across